An elderly man dies and is reincarnated into the body of an enslaved 10-year-old boy living in a harsh mountain fortress. Using the wisdom and experience of his past life, he works to navigate a brutal, class-divided society to secure his survival and rise from his lowly station. An old man leaves a life of quiet anonymity, passing away in a rented room while clutching the heavy weight of a dozen unfinished things. He wakes to the biting cold of stone and the smell of wet straw, his hands small and young, marked by a strange, pale burn. A sharp kick to the ribs reminds him of his stature, as a boy named Garrick looms over him, sneering at his sluggish movement. He discovers his name is Elian, a servant owned by the fortress, fated for a life of labor under the gaze of masters who wield magic. He observes the Harrogate's cruel hierarchy, where the gifted dwell in sunlit luxury, while the servants toil in the reachless dark below. Elian learns to move carefully, mimicking the invisible posture of those who have survived, making himself a mere shadow among the stone. He uses the logic of his former life to map the room, noting which bullies are merely afraid and which are truly dangerous. A young lordling named Pell toys with him using a flick of blue fire, burning a lock of hair as a casual display of dominance. Lying in the dark, Elian assesses his inventory. No magic, no strength, and no wealth, but he possesses the one thing they lack: old, iron-willed patience. He fixes his gaze on his scarred wrist, turning the mark of his lowly place into a silent, internal vow to begin his ascent. He whispers his readiness to the shadows, a man starting again from the very bottom, fully prepared to climb where others would have surrendered. Winter tightened its grip on the Harrogate, turning the air brittle and stealing away the youngest among the servants who could no longer endure the biting cold. Elian Voss watched in silence, his expression a mask of stone. He had learned long ago that grief was a luxury for those who could afford to be noticed. Then there was Steward Varno, a man fueled by small tyrannies and a desperate need to feel superior to those he commanded in this frozen fortress. Elian studied the steward not with fear, but as a carpenter studies a lock, searching for the mechanism that might eventually grant him the freedom to move. The fragile piece broke when Garrick shattered a jar of valuable oil, immediately pointing a trembling finger at the boy to shift the steward's inevitable rage. Refusing to panic, Elian knelt in the slick oil and spoke with calm precision, framing the accident as a structural failure of the sagging shelving units. By offering a solution that let Varno remain the competent authority, the boy transformed himself from a target of punishment into a valuable asset. Someone's eyes narrowed, finally seeing a use for the boy, and he begrudgingly granted him the task of assisting with the store count as a test of loyalty. Inside the strong room, surrounded by barrels and grain, Elian corrected the steward's tally with a silent confidence that left the man shaken by the boy's intellect. Later, in the shadows of the sleep quarters, the bully returned to assert his dominance, but Elian coolly neutralized the threat by reminding him of their shared peril. Having traded a beating for a tentative alliance, Elian lay in the dark, already weaving plans to make himself so necessary that the house could never discard him. In the cold shadows of the strong room, the boy kept a secret that only a man of his years could possibly someone tally of survival. The grain and oil ledgers were not just inventory. They were a map of the estate's hidden pulse, revealing exactly who was bleeding the house dry. A girl named Sable stood between him and the rest of the Undercroft, wielding a blade and a sharp, cynical heart that mirrored his own isolation. Elian broke his silence, offering an alliance built on the truth of the stolen oil and the shared weight of their forgotten existence. She was hard as stone, but as the weeks bled into months, the wall between them grew thin, and a rare, silent partnership was forged. Piece by piece, they traced the thefts, unmasking the greed of a functionary who thought their lowly status made them blind to his corruption. When the family's rage finally descended, Elian offered Steward Varno a lifeline, the path to salvation or the sting of professional destruction. The functionary was gone by someone phantom of the ledger erased, yet the victory was not in the theft, but in the leverage earned. Steward Varno saw the boy differently now, his wariness sharpening into a begrudging respect for a child who played a game beyond his years. Instead of bread or safety, Elian demanded the keys to power, the high script of the masters, the language that sealed their own chains. He was building a wall of knowledge brick by painful brick. The boy was no longer merely surviving, he was preparing to conquer. In the shadow of the great hearth, the young ash boy discovered that he could grasp the mechanics of magic better than the arrogant nobility who wielded it. While others relied on raw, untamed power, he understood that magic was merely someone's geometry of proportions that he could map with his own disciplined mind. With the patience born of a second life, he scavenged his education in secret, memorizing diagrams and equations whenever the lords looked away. The loneliness was a heavy weight. He guarded his intellectual rebellion like a soldier, fearing that even a whisper of his knowledge could end his life. Everything changed when Aldrich Corvin grew reckless, attempting a spell with an inverted ratio that was destined to collapse on the arrogant young noble. Elian knew that if the Lord was harmed, the servants would be blamed. He had one heartbeat to decide between silence and survival. He spoke, his voice cracking with the fear of a child, but the cold precision of an old soul cutting through someone magical incompetence. Aldrich stared at him with burning fury, yet someone correction was the key to unlocking the power he had so desperately sought to master. With trembling hands, Elian corrected the lattice, demonstrating a mastery of numbers that terrified and enthralled the young aristocrat. The spell snapped into place with a blinding flash, a success that solidified the boy's new, dangerous position as someone's secret architect. He had bartered his labor for a seat at the right hand of power, knowing that in this world, knowledge was the only weapon that could truly set him free. 2 years in the Harrowgate tempered Elian Voss into a silent blade, learning that survival meant being indispensable to Aldrich Corvin while keeping his brilliance utterly hidden. He forged a quiet alliance with Sable, a resilient kitchen servant who understood the value of the influence they built in the shadows of the estate. Sable challenged him for giving away his own potential, but the boy knew that every scrap of credit he fed to his master was a strategic investment. Bound by a trust they had both earned, they recognized that living for others was a conscious choice, not a failure of ambition or a fool's errand. By observing the house from the fringes, he mapped the hidden rivalries and pressure points of the powerful who assumed he was merely a piece of furniture. He disciplined himself to suffer the ache of being invisible, watching others claim the fruits of his intellect while he bided time for his own moment. The fragile peace shattered with the arrival of Cassius Malrith, a predator cloaked in silk who brought a document designed to dismantle the Corvin legacy. The Corvin leadership sat trapped in their own arrogance, unable to parse the legal forgery that Cassius Malrith had tucked into the contract's thick prose. Elian, listening from the shadows, saw the numerical lie hidden in the text, a flaw born from 2 lifetimes of experience that none of the gifted saw. He caught the eye of the room, feeling the absolute weight of the risk. Silence meant safety, but speaking meant claiming his place in the world. Setting aside his master's books, he challenged the magelord with the calm precision of a man who was no longer afraid of anything the world could take. Silence fell over the high table, a sharp, suffocating void. One word from Elian Voss had dared to challenge the absolute authority of the gifted. Cassius Malrith smiled with predatory coldness, his thin lips curling at the audacity of an ash boy speaking before the assembled lords of the mountain. But the old Corvin lord chose to lean in instead of striking, tethering the room's fate to the servant's claim, while Steward Varno trembled in the shadows. Elian stepped forward, placing the household's dusty someone recovered by someone onto the heavy mahogany to expose the forgery. The math was undeniable. As Elian dismantled the trap, he refused to point fingers, allowing the truth to emerge as an objective, undeniable fact. Invisible in the dark, Sable had navigated the lower house's forbidden vaults, orchestrating the victory from deep within the shadows of the stronghold. When the forgery shattered beneath his feet, Cassius Malrith faced the ignominy of driving away from the Harrowgate with his reputation in absolute ruin. Elian performed the role of the humble servant, carefully projecting subservience to hide the lethal ambition that could mark him as a threat to the gifted. Sensing the dangerous shift in the Lord's eyes, Elian deftly deflected all glory, insisting that Aldrich Corvin was the true mastermind behind his education. Alone in the cold corridor, Aldrich finally acknowledged his servant, moving past mere interest into the wary, genuine regard of one man to another. Climbing out of the suffocating darkness of the Undercroft, Elian grasped Sable's hand. He was still a servant, but now he was a force to be remembered. 4 years of relentless ascent brought Elian Voss to the Western Terrace, no longer a nameless servant, but a functionary standing tall above the Harrowgate. While others relied on volatile magic, Elian mastered the cold truth behind someone's ledger and debt, becoming the essential gear in the machine of power. His bond with Aldrich Corvin had evolved into a wary, calculated alliance of equals, both men knowing their secrets were locked behind a shared history. In the shadows of the lower house, Sable commanded a silent web of informants, turning the scullery into the true eyes and ears of the stronghold. Then the peace was shattered. Cassius Malrith returned to the Harrowgate, not with an army, but with a legal trap designed to end Elian for good. Standing before the High Lords, Elian realized his life was now the currency of a ransom, weighed coldly against his someone desire to survive. He stepped into the light not to beg, but to pivot, He dismantled Cassius by revealing that he alone possessed the keys to ruin the Malrath house. He argued that a living clerk with hidden knowledge was a far greater asset than a dead one, forcing the house to realize his true value. The gamble paid off. The look of triumph on Cassius's face withered as he realized the snare he set for a boy had finally trapped himself. Sable found him on the terrace. Even though he could have fled, Elian understood his work here was only the beginning of a larger campaign. Staring at the road below, he saw not an escape, but a path to future worlds. Elian Voss was no longer just surviving, he was conquering. That's where the second morning of Elian Voss leaves us, for now.